traveled 65 miles to get here today?
No.
Isn't there always a reward for farmless traveler? So, until my boys moved to California 5 years ago, their deepest convictions on controversial issues had never been challenged. The progressive neighborhood we left behind, called Uptown in South Minneapolis, serenely reflected our own left-leaning positions on politics, climate change, civil rights, education, and so on. And also, just like us, it favored secular values over religious intrusion. But all this changed on the 10th of April, 2014, when the religiously conservative town of Redlands, about 65 miles east of here, forced my sons, who were just 10 and 8 at the time, to face what it feels like to be a minority experiencing adversity head-on. So for about the first half a year, although I never showed it, I felt a fair amount of sympathy for them. As a parent, I was a cuddler. I am a cuddler, but not a coddler. And I was proud of that. But the truth is, I'd never truly been in a challenging enough situation in which my refusal to overprotect them was legitimately put to the test. And now, suddenly it was. And I found myself wanting to respond like so many other parents nowadays, the snowplow parent, who, in an effort to eliminate any suffering and struggle, removes every obstacle in their child's way in an effort to make their life as smooth and painless as possible. It's especially hard not to be a snowplow parent when you feel that their sadness is your fault. When my husband and I moved, they didn't have a choice. They were forced to leave behind a life that was extremely fulfilling for them. An amazing school, a neighborhood filled with children, a park across the street, and cousins that they loved to spend time with. I berated myself for allowing this move to happen. From the get-go, Redlands reminded me of a small, stifling, religious town that I'd grown up in. Exactly the kind of place that I never in 1,000 years imagined that I would be raising my own children in. And yet here I was. So, but funnily enough, out of all the different types of people in the world, I've always found those who do nothing but gripe about where they live and the kind of people that are in it, some of the most annoying people I have ever met. So I really was determined. Can you hear me? So sorry. Evan promised me this was rock solid. Okay. I was really determined not to be that kind of person. And I was determined to find a way to be happy, and deduced that the first step in coming up with a solution was to set aside the pettier reasons for why I didn't like Redlands. So, for example, the fact that there was just, although beautiful, one tiny library, one coffee shop that I could barely describe as hip, no nearby airport, too few community theaters, etc. So I had to set aside these pettier reasons in order to expose the true source of my dissatisfaction. And when I did this, I discovered that what really was going on was that my boys and I were just terribly lonely. The perfect weather, the gorgeous landscape, the safety of the town, the politeness of the folks, none of this means anything if you feel utterly unconnected to your community. For isolation is a killer. So now that I'd gotten to the root of the problem, I felt sure I could fix it. Problem solving was something I'd always felt pretty confident about. So of course, I'm a mom, so I focused on my children's loneliness first. Because we'd moved to California just 2 months before the end of the school year, my plan was to see if I could connect with a few parents before summer break so that our children could play together during the 8 weeks they had off. So their school in Minneapolis had provided a directory, but their new school just down the street did not. So I resorted to writing notes. And I put these notes in envelopes, and I gave them to my boys, and then the boys gave them to these kids that they liked, and then those kids hopefully gave that note to their parents, and then I would hopefully get an email or a phone call or a text. Suffice it to say, it did not work. So then I tried showing up early, before and after school, so that I could meet some parents face to face. I'd ask my boys, like a crazy person, to point out which kids they were having fun with, and then I'd follow that kid so that I could introduce myself to that parent. But none of the parents were interested in adding more people to their lives. So when I asked my boys to ask these classmates what they usually do on the weekends, their answer was overwhelmingly that they went to church and spent time with relatives. So I tried more things. Even though my kids aren't into group sports, we tried soccer, swim club, but every time the takeaway was the same. My kids found the other kids dull. Now, not mean, just dull. And at this point, my older child told me to give it a rest. My desire for him and his brother to make friends as smart and dynamic as their friends they had back in Minneapolis was starting to feel like pressure on them. So although it wasn't in my nature, I took a break from the boys. I took solace in the fact that at least they had each other and decided to concentrate on myself. I thought that if I could just get lucky, if I could somehow bump into one person whose life wasn't entirely wrapped up in Jesus, it would be the break I needed insofar as ending this too quiet existence that I was living. So I fantasized about how it would go. By some miracle, we'd recognize that the other person didn't worship a god either. We decided that this connection alone was enough for us to like each other. Next, he or she would introduce me to their God-free friends, and on until my life was bursting with smart and informed and enlightened people who would surely have children my children's age. Time passed, and nothing even remotely similar to this scenario happened. The people I met couldn't wait to tell me about their lives that revolved around their church. Their church was what gave their life meaning and purpose. The members of the congregation were their friends, their community, their social life. And for me, this was far too bland. There was a one-dimensionalness, if that's a word, to these people that I just couldn't pretend didn't bore me. And so it was impossible for me to justify spending more time with them, despite the fact that I was still horribly lonely. God, I hated how much I hated this town. It was pure insanity, knowing there had to be cultivated and complicated people nearby, but having no idea how to find them. I tried hard to feel grateful instead of miserable. I should have been celebrating the purchase of our new home and my husband's flashy new job that he loved. But just like the gorgeous, glorious weather, the stunning landscape, a big house and impressive job don't mean a thing if mostly what you feel is like an alien. Life hobbled on. Then, one night, after everyone was asleep, it dawned on me to see if Google could help me. Even though I had no idea where to start. So I remember Googling things like liberals and red Redlands. I Googled anything that I thought could possibly help me meet up with people that I could have complex conversations with on a variety of topics. That's all I wanted. So I can't remember what else I punched in or exactly what these searches yielded, but I do remember that I just fell flat. So finally, in desperation, and more or less to humor myself, I Googled atheists in Redlands. To my amazement, up popped something I'd never heard of, called the Inland Empire Atheists and Agnostics Meetup Group. What is this? Not only had I never heard of Meetup, I didn't know there was any such thing as an organized atheist and agnostic community out there. This was a watershed moment for me, the break I was looking for. When I went to bed that night, I felt, for the very first time since moving to Redlands, a glimmer of hope. It was a real sense that my life in this small, conservative, and religious town was finally taking a turn for the better. Now, it may surprise you that I had no idea an atheist community existed. But the thing is, before moving to Redlands, my atheism was about as consequential to my life as the fact that I'm left-handed. When I left home for college at the age of 18, my belief in God, strictly imposed on me by my Catholic parents while growing up, quickly vanished, almost imperceptibly, without an ounce of drama. I felt neither sadness nor relief. With no one forcing religion on me, it dropped like that, and I never reconsidered my choice. My guess is that God had stopped feeling true for quite some time, but because my parents had made me go to church, receive communion, confess my sins, recite the rosary, you get the picture. There was never a chance to stand back and objectively consider whether what I was being force-fed was good for me or pure garbage. And because as a grown-up I'd almost always lived in larger cities, God was seldom front and center in people's lives. I was aware that most of my friends did believe in a God, but he didn't appear to be the driving force in their lives, as is the case in Redlands. So mostly I got the sense that religion had more to do with maintaining traditions and staying connected to their past and families than anything else. It was cultural more than cultish, if you will. So indeed, Redlands was the first time I'd experienced religion as something that appears to permeate everything. I go to my medical clinic and there is a plaque sitting on the check-in desk that says, "God bless America." It seems every other car in town, and I'm not exaggerating, has a religious bumper sticker on it. A Bible scripture or a bold claim of some sort that Jesus has all the answers. Occasionally, these bumper stickers will instruct me. They tell me that God knows what he's doing, that God is behind the wheel, so to speak, and in control. At one of the schools my kids attended, the principal had a religious placard on her desk, the principal of a public school. Half the teachers wear crosses around their necks, which I think is inappropriate, again, for a public school. A couple times a year, men hand out Bibles on the sidewalk a few feet from my kids' from the entrance to the school. At the Home Depot, the checkout person always says to me, "God bless you," every single time without fail. And every single time I want to speak to the manager about how he or she should instruct the employees, about leaving their religious convictions outside the door. The coffee table in the waiting area of my chiropractic office has a Bible on it, instead of the usual rags like People or Good Housekeeping. The first time I went to the Redlands market night, I was astounded at how many booths had something to do with, are you going to go to heaven or hell? Just fill out this 2-minute survey. When I auditioned at one of the 3, this is funny to all you people in LA, I bet, at one of the 3 community theaters in town, I was handed a sheet of paper. It was a note from the director, which I actually thought was like a sweet touch. But in the letter, he welcomed all of us actors and thanked us for coming. And then he went on to say that he was confident that God would be at his side during the audition process. That he'd be guiding him through the rehearsals as well. I was flabbergasted. And then I learned that this theater also forms prayer circles at the beginning of every rehearsal. It seems like every single day, no matter how brief my encounter with people, an almighty God comes up in conversation. Either he is being given full credit for something that turned out in this person's favor, or being relied upon to provide answers for the various dilemmas in this person's life. All in all, he is a trusted and omnipotent guide who clearly makes them feel more secure and less alone. And who doesn't want that feeling? What's comical is that in the beginning, I was always nervous, like after they got done speaking about their God and their church, that they would ask me about, my religion. And then I realized, oh my God, this is never going to happen. Because they never doubted for a minute that I also believed in God. It was just an utter assumption. Of course, the weight of all this religiosity lightened significantly once I joined the IEAA. The second I felt less alone and supported, the fact that God was everywhere, so to speak, started to feel less and less smothering and more like, a mild irritation. But there was just one problem. None of this was helping my boys. By this point, Hank, my oldest, had trotted off to middle school, while Levi, my other boy, transferred to a slightly better elementary school than the one he had started at, just down the road. So in Minneapolis, neither my boys nor I were ever a member of any group, any T-ball, PTA, nothing. It just wasn't our nature, and also because there wasn't the need. When the boys felt social, they stepped outside the house. There was a park across the street, a neighborhood filled with children, and even the school they attended was just a mecca for free thinkers. Free from the influence of a looming God, their minds were wide open, keen to investigate the wonders of life around them at the school. Then we arrived here, and suddenly it was as if we had landed on another planet, or should I say, crashed. And every day was painful. My middle schooler would describe to me how at lunch, day in and day out, his classmates would try to convince him of the existence of God. Most often using what as evidence? The Bible. They invited him to their Bible study groups. My younger one brought home stories as well. Students at his school talked about how Jesus was their hero. Others explained that they were walking with God and weren't allowing themselves to be distracted by negative influences. As for my boys and I, we just kept believing that at a school with hundreds of students, there had to be a few free thinkers in there. But without a way to identify them, it sometimes felt like it didn't even matter whether they were there or not.
Sorry.
That's okay. Finally, I'd had enough. It was time that my sons joined a group just as I had done. So I told my oldest that he had to participate in something. Anything, I did not care what it was, but he was going to do it. So he decided on the school orchestra, picked the double bass and embraced it from the start. That spring, he added jazz band, and the following fall, he auditioned for the Redlands Youth Symphony and got in. Yeah. That was 3 years ago. And even though the vast majority of these musicians are conservative Christians, a few, and I chalk that up to like now he's in high school, he's a 9th grader, have opened up to him that they are atheists. Their parents don't know, but it's kind of cool. But anyway, God or no God, Hank's been able to connect to these kids through the power of music. It has emboldened him and helped him find a sense of belonging in this town, which is all I wanted. So at the same time Hank was getting into music, my son Levi tried out for the Redlands Youth Circus as a juggler and made the team. As it turned out, he was on average like 10 years younger than everyone else in the group. So it wasn't easy for him to make fast friends, but just like his older brother, the very act of doing something he was passionate about with, among other people who felt the same way, was empowering. And so it went that over the next couple of years, music and the circus and the IEAA helped my boys and I go from feeling completely lost and alone to more connected and fulfilled. We were finally finding some solid ground. So much so that in the fall of 2016, I decided, with the help of another IEAA member who lives in Redlands, to start an atheist and agnostic group right in Redlands. We called it FAR, Free Thinkers Around Redlands. And with the help of 10 other committee members, we set up a variety of reoccurring monthly activities. For me, something I was not going to bend on was I wanted every single one of our activities to be open to children.